Good morning. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Come on in. We are so excited to have you here. Come on in, everyone. You can greet each other through the chat if you'd like. We are excited to have you here. My name is Constance Lacey. I serve as the Dean of the School of Human Services at the University of North Texas at Dallas. And we're excited to have you here. We have several things to cover this morning. But in order to get us started on time, I am going to introduce our illustrious Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Betty Stewart, who will provide the welcome. And we're going to give her a few minutes to get started. And Dr. Stewart, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this important conversation at this time. I'm so excited to have you here today because what better topic for us to have? Thank you all for, first of all, to the conference organizers. Thank you for bringing this subject to the forefront at this time. I am so excited about being a part of the University of North Texas at Dallas. It is quite an honor to serve at an institution that was placed in Southern Dallas for a specific mission and vision to empower students, transform lives, and strengthen our communities, as well our vision of being a pathway to socioeconomic mobility through education for our students and their families. Today, as we look at cultural lenses, what better topic for us to discuss? This has been a difficult 16 months for all of us. And as an educator, I came to the University of North Texas at Dallas to share my passion for education and to provide an opportunity for students who would not normally have this opportunity. For those of you who don't know, the University of North Texas at Dallas is a Hispanic serving institution as well as a minority serving institution, with over 85% of our student enrollment being either Latinx or African American. And I wanted a platform where I could share my passion, my love of education, and my vision for the future, and to expose this to a group of students who might not normally have this opportunity to do so. But the conversation that we'll be having today around social determinants of health, health issues, with looking through a racial lens is so important, because I would just like to share with you a few statistics as they are now coming in about what these past 16 months have meant to our populations. High school students in the class of 20 and the class of 21 have endured massive disruption. Many of these students are postponing or canceling post-secondary education plans, even after, in many cases, they have applied and been accepted to college. And the primary reason for not pursuing education is feelings of stress, anxiety, and uncertainty. And this has taken a massive toll on our students. And when you think about the question of educational attainment, we know that it is so important for our students to start off and be in a healthy environment. Some of the other data that has come in, and we look at percentages of ethnic groups, 21% of Latinos, 15% of Blacks or African Americans versus 11% of whites have canceled their educational plans because of the pandemic. 29% of Latinx students, and 27% of Black or African American students versus 15% of white students have changed their educational plans. And what we've also seen is that the greatest toll on post-secondary education has been at the undergraduate level. 8.2% of students withdrew or took a leave of absence during the pandemic. Of that 8.2%, 7.2% were Black versus 3.4% white. 6.0% were aged 24 or older versus 3.4% of those between 15 and 23. And 7.7% were unmarried with children versus 4% that were married with dependents. These demographics reflect the students at UNT Dallas. And so what better time for this conference to come in and help us have discussions about what we can do to face these challenges and to provide opportunities for our students. We are so thankful that you're here today. We look forward to the crucial, critical, and cultural conversations that you will be having. And we're delighted to be able to spend this time with you. And now I'd like to bring back Dr. Constance Lacey, our Dean of the School of Human Services. Dr. Lacey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. We are certainly aware and feel the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on our bodies, on our students' bodies. And I think this is going to be a great opportunity for us to start to look at that impact on overall. So we appreciate you so much for your welcome. And I'd like to piggyback on what Dr. Stewart has said on behalf of the Symposium Committee and our university leadership. I'm so excited you chose to attend the Cultural Lenses Symposium. This is our first attempt, and so we thank you for your grace in allowing us to move through this virtual atmosphere. Our hope for the day is that you experience a deeper understanding of the cultural and structural barriers that impact mental health for the African American communities today. That's the conversation for today, and tomorrow our conversation will be about that same impact on the Hispanic and Latinx communities. I would like to extend a huge thank you to my symposium planning committee. Miss Gloria Jackson from Eastfield College has been the foundation and thought leader in this process. Miss Carmen Andujar, who is with the National Hispanic Latinx Mental Health ATTC. Miss Kiala Jacques, who served as our project manager and has sent out all the emails to make sure you had everything you need. And Miss Judith Nix, my illustrious administrative assistant, who never fails to keep me on task. I would also like to acknowledge and recognize Miss Maureen Nichols, who is the director of the Southwest Addiction Technology Transfer Center and is one of our major sponsors. Our sponsors, all of our sponsors are featured on our sponsor page. And so if you click at the top and you look at sponsors, or if you choose to go to the network, that's a place for you all to meet each other and to conversate. We really wanted this to feel like a real symposium, a real conference. So please take the time to navigate through those different tabs to meet other people. We would encourage you to take the time to visit all of the sponsors and those networking centers. And I have a couple of housekeeping before we get to the real meat of what we're here this morning about and begin these conversations. The schedule for today contains the links to all of your sessions. You do not have to choose them ahead of time. You chose them, and you can go navigate through them throughout the morning. If you would like CEUs, you need to attend 80% of our 45-minute sessions so that we can ensure that you get to complete the survey and you get your CEUs or your certificate in real time. After each session, you'll be expected to complete that survey. And then at the end of the symposium, you'll have the ability to download a certificate of completion from the education tab as well. If you have registered, we know that your license number will appear on that. So we've done everything we can to make sure you get credit. And then every session will be recorded and can be accessed after the symposium ends. So we have a great day laid out for you, a morning, I will say. We'll finish at 1 o'clock today. And we hope you will enjoy the day's conversation and speakers. You'll have a little time in between each breakout session to take a break, take care of yourself, and then jump back in and join us. I am so excited to present to you our first conversationalist. He doesn't want to be featured as a keynote speaker, but I am excited that Mr. Resmaa Menakem, he's the New York Times bestselling author of the book entitled My Grandmother's Hands. He's also the son of one of our faculty, Dr. Amanda Coleman Mason. I have to give his mom the props. If football players can do it, so can, you know, world-renowned authors. And so I want to give her props for coordinating getting him here with us today. And we're going to have a conversation. He let me know that I don't get to get off. We're going to have a talk. And so if you have questions, please jump in. Ms. Jocks will let us know. If you have questions, this is going to be a conversation. And I have some questions, but I really want the audience to be engaged in this conversation as well. Welcome, 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 Resmaa. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with y'all. I'm glad, Dr. Stewart was talking earlier about that this is the right time to start having this conversation. I believe that when it comes to Latinx and people of African descent, Black folks, that this conversation has been long overdue. Anytime we can start to begin to talk about what the possibilities are, what inequities that exist, and how do we overcome those inequities, I think is the right time to do it. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And if it's okay with you, we'll get started on asking you some questions. I've started reading your book, and actually I'm a clinician by profession as well, and has made this a recommended or referred reading for some of my clients, only because they only see me 1 hour, but they need to understand how to process the traumas that they are experiencing. And so one of the terms you talk about is somatic abolitionism. Did I pronounce that right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
And you kind of give a little bit of background on what motivated you to write your book, and then I'm going to lead go straight to that conversation around somatic abolitionism.
So really, the book came out of a number of different things. So the book, My Grandmother's Hands, was actually born out of my own struggle with trauma. After I got back I did 2 years working with doing clinical work and communal work over in Afghanistan. And so my job was I was in charge of 53 bases in southern Afghanistan. So whenever the bases would get hit or something would happen, there was a suicide, there was a bombing, there was violence, there was somebody lost a child from back home, anything like that. My job was to go to those bases and give people support, primarily civilians. What a lot of people don't know is that many of the bases over in Afghanistan were run by civilians, even though the military um, um, secured the base. A lot of the logistic stuff, like how food got on and off bases, that was done by people like me and you. And many of those people did not have necessarily any military training. So my job was to help them process being in a very difficult place, 121 degrees. A lot of, you're constantly hearing gunshots and stuff like that. And so during that time, I had to override a lot of my own trauma response in order to be of service to people. And so when I got home in 2013 is when I started actually dealing with and having a lot of my own stuff that I had overridden start to begin to come up. And so through the course of that, through the course of suicidal stuff and just adjustment stuff, one of the things that happened is that there became this confluence of my own personal trauma and then the historical trauma that I was kind of carrying, the intergenerational trauma, as well as the persistent institutional trauma that I was being exposed to in my communities. And so that began me to begin to think about not just trauma in terms of personal, but trauma in terms of historical, and how does it show up as blood pressure? How does it show up as vaginal fibroids? How does it show up in the actual body of people, as opposed to thinking that trauma is only a cognitive piece? My somatic abolitionism is my belief is that white supremacy and white body supremacy is actually trauma, right? It has traumatizing effects on the body. A lot of people don't know, but there were a lot of Latinx people that were also lynched during the time of Jim Crow. And so how does that stuff get transferred down in the body and can look like personality in a person? Time decontextualizes trauma. So if something happens to me right now, Dr. Lacey, and you watch it happen, and then 2 weeks from now, you see me and I'm acting strange, you're going to say, Resmaa, we need to get you some help. I love you. Let's go. I'm going to get you some help, right? Because you will put into context my behavior to what happens, right? To what happened to me. But what happens with time is that time decontextualizes that. So what if 5 years from now you see me and I'm acting strange? Now all of a sudden it looks like it's my personality. Right. And so what I say is that time decontextualizes trauma, and it can look like over time, trauma can look like personality in a person. Trauma decontextualized over time can look like family traits in a family. Yes. Trauma decontextualized in a people can look like culture over time. Right. And so that's what somatic abolitionism is about, is how do we begin to address the brutalization, the terror, the horror of white body supremacy? How do we begin to address it and abolish it, starting with the body first, not cognition?
Wow. Wow. So that leads to your conversation about how you give, I know after each chapter, and it isn't a fast read.
No.
Where you have to sit, you have to process this information.
Yeah.
And you give breathing exercises. You want to talk about how that helps process that trauma?
Yeah. So one of the things I talk about in the book is the idea of practice, right? That I don't call them exercises, I call them practices, because I believe that if you're going to be curious about trauma, especially racialized trauma, you're going to have to build a container to hold that charge. One of the things I say, Dr. Lacey, is that race has a 4, 5, and in some cases 600-year charge to it. Wow. Right. So when you begin to address race, if if you have not done your own work, what will happen is that that charge will blow through you,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so part of the practices in the book are really about how do you begin to temper and condition your body to be able to withstand that charge when you
Yes.
start to begin to do a practice, and then all of a sudden your grandmother shows up, or all
Yes.
of a sudden you notice something happening in your body, or you notice that this experience that you've been having, that you've had your whole life, you're now starting to make some connections to things, right? Well,
Wow.
if you haven't tempered your body to be able to hold that, and anxiety starts to show up,
Mhm. Mhm.
you won't have any way of processing it and using that energy as fuel for your own freedom, as opposed to fuel to reinforce a failure, right?
Yeah.
And so part of the book is really, and you're absolutely right, the book really is about slowing down. Right?
Yeah.
Trauma is about speed, right? React to something that is overwhelming so you can deal with it and move on, right? But what happens when trauma comes into play, you may survive that thing, but that thing that your body wanted to do that it could not do because you overrode it, still needs to be done. And so and so part of what ends up happening in the book is that I really try and get people to slow down enough to experience the dissonance and the resonance that shows up all at one time in little bitty chunks, so you can actually work with it, both individually and communally, as opposed to giving you tips in order to how to get rid of it. That's not how trauma works. Trauma works in terms of, or not, trauma healing works in terms of metabolizing, not getting rid of it.
So that leads to the question that Dr. Columbus, one of the participants, asked on how would you explain the relationship between PTSD and decontextualized trauma? But you
Mm,
just explained it in that
yeah,
regards,
yeah,
is that it's not getting over something immediately. It's
right,
recognizing, I
yeah,
think, I would say giving yourself permission to
right,
feel, to recognize,
right, right,
then start to heal,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Because some of what you're healing is not just personal. And
Hmm.
that's the thing, right? Some of what you're healing has not been healed for 400 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? And so when that stuff shows up, we really don't have a context for why am I experiencing these images? Why am I experiencing this constriction in my belly, this constriction in my throat, my hips starting to lock down? Is
Yeah.
that new or is that old? And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
those pieces can't be rushed through. We have a tendency to want to rush through it because we don't know what to do with it. But really, and let me say this last piece: bodies of culture in this country do not experience post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, we experience pervasive and persistent traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, absolutely. I like
Right?
that. I like
It's,
that.
it
Basic
that
system.
Yeah, because post would imply that the trauma is only personal and that it is over,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we know through watching, what happened to Brother Rodney King.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first times you see that on film, on moving film, not on pictures, because they used to take pictures of our lynchings, right, and send them out with trading cards, as trading cards. But in terms of moving pictures, this type of brutality in terms of the Black body and in terms of the Latinx body has been consistent,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so there's a different way we must deal with um, pervasive and persistent traumatic stress disorder that's different than post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's powerful. It's I want to say, Selah, stop and ponder on this, right? um, your book is full of body-centered activities that people can either separately or do in groups. But you also talk about certain parts of the book are for white folks, certain parts of the book are written for Black folks, certain part of the book are written for police. Why did
Right.
you include police, and kind of give us the rationale behind that?
Well, in the context of trauma, right? Um, um, I think that um, a lot of my training and a lot of the work that I had been doing here in Minneapolis revolved around training police officers to understand trauma, not just trauma in terms of other people, but the functionality of trauma. Like, what does it do? How does it show up? What is secondary trauma? What is vicarious trauma? What is moral injury, right? What are these pieces? And beginning to help police officers understand that they are not born on a planet called Policia, right? And then they come down to Earth, right? that that they're born on this same land
Right.
that indigenous people were genocided off of,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That they are born on this land in which Black bodies were enslaved,
Yes.
that they are born on a land where we have colonization, imperialism, and land theft, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so and so when they come into contact and when they're working through and working with people, they will inevitably come into contact with not only the trauma of other people, but come into contact with their own trauma, that the natural that not the
Yeah.
natural, but the tendency in a lot of organizations, like policing organizations, is to override when you see a baby that came out of a fire, or somebody got into a bad car accident, you saw part of their head smashed, right? The tendency is to override that. And I believe that that tendency shows up in interactions with Black bodies and Latin bodies, because the Latin body. So one of the rubrics that I start from when I'm doing my work, when I'm talking or helping people to begin to understand racialized trauma, is I start with this definition. And the definition is that the white body has deemed and deems itself the supreme standard by which all bodies' humanity shall be measured structurally and philosophically,
Wow.
right? So just pause on that just for a minute.
Yeah.
That for me, that is the organizing rubric of this country before the Constitution, right? Before the Declaration of Independence. You
Mm-hmm.
had this philosophy around the white body being the standard of humanness, and every other body a deviance from that standard of humanness. The
Mm-hmm.
race question in this country is actually a species question. This is a lot of what people miss a lot when we
Wow.
start talking about race, is that the European concept of race was about species, a
Yes.
race of dog, a race of cat, a race of bird. They took that concept and applied it to human beings, and so created a whole concept around that pigmentation would tell you whether or not somebody was human. And the standard of that pigmentation, or the rubric by which that pigmentation would be judged, was the white body as standard. And every other body was a deviance from that standard. And so
Wow.
that knowledge helix was shared among the five superpowers of the time: France, England, Spain, Portugal, and the Netherlands. And so they would share kind of that knowledge or that thought around who the African was, who the Asian, who the Asian body was, what the Latin body was, right? And when I say Latin body, I don't mean Spain. I mean
Mhm.
places where indigenous people lived first, and
Yes.
then Spain came and did what they
Yes.
did, and now people speak Spanish the
Yes.
same way we speak English,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so the idea of understanding trauma and racialized trauma is really about contextualizing pieces, so people don't think that something is wrong with them or that they're defective. But in the structure, the structure says in a hierarchical way that you are not human simply because you are in Black or pigmentation that is not white.
So Jasmine Herrera Martinez asked a question. Would you say that passive persistent stress disorder would be complicated?
Pervasive.
Pervasive, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Pervasive, thank you. Persistent stress disorder would be complicated for individuals of mixed race that are both minorities. For instance,
Mm,
a mixed individual with Latin and African American roots. Does it
mm.
become even more difficult in your opinion?
I wouldn't say difficult, right? What I would say is that there are particular stressors that show up in each one of those lines, right? And so as a somatic practitioner, when I'm working with those bodies, if I'm working with a body in my office and that body comes from those two different lines, there's an energy component that shows up when they're trying to work through that stuff.
Yeah.
Part of the container, part of what I try and do is have a thick enough container that can hold that charge with them as they begin to navigate what's showing up, as they begin to navigate it's what I call VIMBAs, right? Is VIMBAS, and VIMBA stands for vibes and vibrations. I stands for images, thoughts, and cognitions. M stands for meaning making. B stands for behavior slash urges. Um, 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 uh, uh, and A stands for affected feelings. And S stands for sensations. So those are what I call intelligence domains. And so when I'm working with somebody, I'm working with them with all 6 of those domains, and I'm looking to see what's showing up, what's connected, what's not connected that should be connected, what wants to get connected but keeps retreating, right? So when I'm working with bodies, that's what I'm working with. So if I'm working with a Latin body and then an African body, both in the same, I know that that energy is going to show up. And what I want to do is hold and work with that energy, right? So a lot of times when people come to see you, they're looking for an answer, right?
Yes.
They're not looking to lean into things, right, and begin to allow the answer to emerge. They want to come and have you give them the answer. And when I'm talking about somatic work, you're allowing the answer to emerge over time, not giving people an answer so they can quote unquote feel better, but what you want them to do is actually heal.
Yeah, I agree with you. As a clinician, one of the mantras that I adhere to is that the client really does have the answer, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's my job, to your point, to help facilitate that process so that they come to the answer that best serves them.
Right.
You talked about in your book, which is titled "Someone Asked My Grandmother's Hands,"
Mm-hmm.
and you might want to make that correlation, but you talk about the soul nerve.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is the soul nerve, and why is it so important?
Mm. So the soul nerve is a part of is what's called the vagal nerve or the vagus nerve, right?
Mhm.
And the vagal nerve is a nerve that comes out of the brainstem, hits the pharynx, hits some part of the face, goes down, hits the chest, lands in the stomach, right? And I believe that that nerve helps people mediate the internal and the external,
Wow.
right? And it works. I believe it also works on vibes, right? It works on vibrations. And when I say vibrations, I don't mean like, usually when we say stuff like that, people go, oh, here go this new age dude, right? When I say vibrations, I'm saying when you walk into a room and you're the only Black person in the room and everybody else is white, you picking up on something.
Yeah.
There is a vibe, there is a resonance, right? And so what we have to do, I think, is really reclaim those pieces, those intelligences that we have actually kind of brushed off sometimes. And so the vagal nerve really is why we have gut reactions to things and we don't know why, right? Because a lot of that nerve lands into the belly.
Yeah.
And so it is also like, Dr. Lacy, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you have children?
Yes, I have
Okay.
three.
3. So do you remember when your children were young, right? And you would come home or something would happen and you walk in and you look at them and you say, "Hey, who who did this thing?"
Mm-hmm.
And you could look at their face. And when one of them said, I didn't do it, and you look at it and you say, your butt lying. I can tell your butt is lying, right? Right. And what's actually happening is that you're noticing certain constrictions in the face, in the
Absolutely.
throat, in the right. You're
Absolutely.
noticing things that really are, I believe, tied to the vagal nerve, right? The longer you're with and around a body, the more you pick up on the subtle transitions and movements and constrictions, and you are able to discern things
Yes.
over time, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
when you call uh, um, your mother and or your father or your brother, and they're on the phone and you're talking to them, and all of a sudden you go, "Hey, what's going on?" Right?
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you can hear something in the pharynx,
Mm-hmm.
right? That, and even if they say nothing, you go, "Okay, all
Yeah.
right," like that. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
what's
that's the
really
vagal
going
nerve.
on? Absolutely. You're
Yeah.
so right. I remember one parent talking about whenever they knew their child wasn't telling the truth, they just asked the question and the child would start doing their fingers like this.
That's it. Yeah,
And they
yeah,
knew
yeah,
at that point, this
yeah.
kid is thinking about how they're going to get themselves out of that
Yeah,
situation. Yeah,
that's
you're
right. And that's what I would say is that those are the very demonstrative ways. But
yes,
I would argue that they're very subtle vibratory things that we pick
yes,
up on also. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, I think and is that aligned with what we call code switching, things such as switch.
Well, yeah, that's the vibratory stuff, right? It's picking up on what is potentially dangerous in the environment and how can I begin to do things, switch a code switch in order to potentially survive the environment. So let me give you an example. So in my office, one of the things that we've been talking that me and my clients have been talking about a lot lately is what COVID actually has done for some people in the Black community and in the Latinx community around having more room to breathe because they weren't having to be around and work around and with white people as much. That's something about not having to go into that environment and being able to have some control over access, right? um, Helped them begin to see about, okay, are there other things that I could actually be doing now? Do I
Right.
want to go back to that environment? Do I want to expose? You understand what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and one of the things I'm working with a lot of Black women on right now is this idea of what's next. That since the COVID, since we're starting to move out
Mhm.
of the COVID a little bit,
Yeah.
um, that question keeps landing in my office. What's next? What's
Yeah.
next?
Yeah.
How can I, is there something that I can begin to do in which the sense of myself, I don't have a sense that it's always under attack or
Yeah.
always under question.
Yes.
So
Yeah. My hope is that conversations such as this, environments, platforms by which we create an opportunity for people to have these authentic conversations will start to help us address in our bodies, but also in our environment,
mhm,
how to navigate those feelings. Right.
yeah,
Our nation is the history is based on the very thing that you talked about around
yeah,
this concept of white body supremacy, but it's going to take time for us to start to allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to
right,
address it, but then
right.
to go from it.
Yeah,
So
but can I just say
yeah,
one thing on that?
you sure can.
So one of the things that I caution people about is that what happened to Black bodies and what happened to Latinx and continues to happen to Black bodies and Latinx bodies, what is that it didn't, those things did not happen to just individual
Mhm.
Black bodies. It happened to communities of
Mhm.
Black bodies. Lynchings, hanging our ancestors from trees was really about not the person that was murdered, but the people that were left, and instilling horror and terror That's why they hung them from trees that they knew people would have to walk by, or bridges that people would have to cross, is because the instilling the terror was the most important thing. That instilling of terror is traumatizing.
Yeah.
And so what I tell people is that it's one thing to have self-care, but some of the trauma that we're dealing with is not individual, it's communal. So we have to develop communal care practices in order to work with the communal horror and the communal terror, not just individual practice to deal with the communal horror and the communal terror.
So that's a great lead into you encourage people to do the humming, kind of talk about that as a form of healing.
Yeah. So the humming really is, I got that I got that from my grandma, right? Is that humming is really for me is a reclamation of pieces that I think now just scientifically people are starting to understand, right? The humming really is about the vagal nerve.
Yeah.
So when priests and monks go to a silent retreat, and they go into a silent retreat where they're not talking and they're oming.
Yeah.
Oh, the reason why they do, one of the effects of that is that it helps to stimulate the vagal nerve, and you can get into a deeper sense of settledness and calm, right? And so our people did that by humming and moaning and rocking and
Yeah.
swaying,
Yeah.
right? Those pieces are, I believe, are really creation pieces that we reclaim. Like my brother was a rocker, right?
Yeah.
He would just, right,
Yeah.
right. My grandmother would rock and she would hum, you know, and
Yeah.
and then I remember being in her lap and my ear up to her chest while she's humming. Well, when she's doing that, that's also stimulating my vagal nerve,
Right.
and so it helps. It just can create a settling.
Yeah.
But the way I talk about this is not as a technique that you just start to begin to utilize in your office. I talk about it as a reclamation of what will allow us to have more room, so what needs to emerge can emerge. I think sometimes when I'm talking, people think that I'm giving them tips and techniques, and I'm not. We have to build a cultural container that can actually hold the charge of white body supremacy and race, and then allow what needs to emerge that's more resourced, right? But many of us can't tolerate the emergence because we haven't conditioned ourselves to be able to withstand the charge when it comes up. We think that something's wrong with us. Ooh, that's spooky. I don't want to do that no more. All of these things start to begin to happen,
Yeah.
and then first thing we want to do is get rid of it. And in the somatic approach, it's not get rid of it; it's metabolize. It's
Yeah.
it's how do you how so one of the things that, or the thing that Einstein said, is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can be manipulated, it can be thwarted, and trauma is a thwarting of creation energy. And so when you heal, what you're doing is you're actually allowing the creation energy that already exists, you're allowing it to actually emerge. Trauma is a thwarting of that. All right. The creation is primary. Trauma is not primary. Trauma is secondary, but it is a powerful secondary thing that usually is tied to survival, whether it's historical survival, intergenerational survival, institutional survival, or personal survival. But as you heal, then the energy can be freed to do other things and be used for other things.
I was just about to say, it sounds as though as we become into this awareness and allow this healing process to happen, it really does give us some power back. Trauma
Mm-hmm.
takes
Mm-hmm.
power, right?
That's exactly right. It's a thwarting. But one of the things that I say about trauma is that trauma is not the bad stepbrother, right? Trauma fulfills it has a function, right? And many times the function is to survive,
Yeah.
right? And so, but that survival, getting organized around that survival over time can be decontextualized. So now I'm sitting here and I've learned all of these things from nervous systems that I love, right? And they don't even know why these so when we are children, we don't just learn from the instruction of our parents or instruction from our caregivers. We also learn from what my mama recoiled from and leaned into, what my daddy recoiled from and leaned into. And I may not know why they recoiled and leaned into it, but I know I need to pay attention to it.
Absolutely.
That's how it becomes decontextualized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. You have several questions here, and you have some comments. One of the participants says that they're from Africa, and seeing how African people are treated in America, they are still experiencing trauma ongoing.
Yeah.
I think about, we've traveled in some other countries, and um, having those people ask us about how we are navigating situations.
Mm-hmm.
George Floyd
Mm-hmm.
helps you understand that they really aren't experiencing at the same level or the same impact, and it does make a difference.
Right. Well, I would say yeah, and that there is no there's there are very few places on the continent of Africa that were untouched by white body supremacy.
Mm.
Whether that be through the stealing and theft of resources, the stealing and theft of land, the stealing and theft of people,
Great point.
I mean, one of the fastest growing products in Africa is whitening creams.
Wow.
So think about that for a minute.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so to suggest that our people in Africa and in Australia and in New Zealand
Mm.
have been and Hawaii have been untouched by white body supremacy would suggest that you have not really delved deep into how the functionality of white body supremacy. And let me say one more thing. So some of the things that I'm saying, there are probably some people on here who are thinking, uh, that's CRT. Resmaa's talking about CRT, critical race theory, and stuff like this. So let me just say this, okay? Because I've gotten blasted by Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro and a lot of people. And so let me just say this. CRT, the idea of CRT is just this. It is a decentering of whiteness as the standard by which you shall, the standard of judging history, philosophy, and peoplehood, right? It is a decentering of whiteness as the rubric by which you will judge how indigenous people see America, right? How indigenous people see the 751 children that they just discovered, that they just dug up in Canada
Wow.
behind boarding schools,
Wow.
right? That CRT suggests that just as it says, critical
Yes.
race theory, which means that we are critical of 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 how race has shaped and continues to shape our realities, right? And so one of the things that I say is that CRT is actually not the problem. The problem is actually in CRT, non-critical race theory, right?
Right.
Because that's the prevailing theory. The
Yeah.
prevailing theory of America is in CRT, non-critical race theory. Just yesterday in Texas, the legislature said that they don't want people teaching about Susan B. Anthony,
Wow.
Martin Luther King.
Wow.
Don't want it taught that the KKK are actually immoral,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now just think about what that will do to the workforce and the ability of the workforce in Texas to navigate other peoples
Yeah.
other than white,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think as leaders, you have to begin to me, there's no such thing as a non-racist, right? You are either about the life of ushering in a living, embodied anti-racist culture, or you're okay with what is. There
The
is no
status
such
quo.
thing as non. There is no middle ground.
Mhm.
And so we have to begin to actually, with those of that believe in justice and freedom and equity, we have to begin to speak and write in ways that allow people to contextualize what's happening, as opposed to what NCRT does is decontextualize what's happening.
That is just profound, and you've done a great job of explaining why we need to remain vigilant and assertive and vocal on having conversations that allow people to not only talk about experiences of our past, but our current experiences,
Exactly right.
our current emotions, our current, and that of our children, because our
Yep.
children are looking for ways, to your point, looking to us and see how we, step in, how we lean in,
That's right. That's
we
right.
lean back.
Yeah.
And so,
They're looking for us to contextualize this mess,
absolutely, absolutely,
right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
and in a way that helps them move forward and not
Exactly right.
moving backwards. This
Exactly.
has just been dynamic. We have just a couple of more minutes, and I think what I want to ask you is if you wanted us to walk away with one or two things that we incorporate in our lives, what would
Mm.
those one or two things be?
I think the one thing um, is to get together with another body.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I don't do when I'm doing my work, I don't slam bodies of culture and white bodies in a room together and say, let's just talk about race, because what that does is does not give respect to the 400-year charge of race, right? And so I have white bodies working with white bodies first, and dealing with some of the trauma that white bodies have yet to deal with regard to other white bodies, right? That a lot of people forget that for 1,000 years, elite white bodies stole land, raped, pillaged for 1,000 years in the Middle Ages. Less elite white bodies and poor white bodies, right? And then that body came here. There was no, they didn't meet a group of trauma therapists from Africa to help them go through that, right?
Yeah.
And that body came here. And one of the things that we know is that when people are victimized, that you don't just learn the victim template when you are victimized and brutalized. You also learn the perpetrator template, right? You learn both.
Mhm.
Yes, the victim perpetrator and action pattern, right? And so what ended up happening is that we so in the process of that, there's all of this horror and terror in white folks that they have yet to deal with. And so a lot of my work is saying to white people, you gotta begin to deal with this with each other, right? And then over time, maybe we can reach across the aisle. But for right now, if a black body or a Latin body is present while you go through that, the black body and Latin body has always been where America has done its dirt. So you will take that 400 years of trauma, or the 1,000 years of trauma, and try and blow it through Black and indigenous bodies. This is not about niceness and kindness, right? White bodies sometimes, I think, collectively think that niceness and kindness is the same thing as ushering in a living, embodied anti-racist culture. They are not the same thing. And so for me, get together with other bodies, read the book, and do the practices, and begin to see what emerges as you do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I just would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge a question that came from Dr. Coleman Mason. And so he asked if you would expound on how Texas laws impact your theoretical development of HIPP, which is
Yeah.
historical, intergenerational, persistent, and personal institutional.
Yeah.
How will upcoming adults learn racial healing if stunted in lessons on race in school?
Yeah. See, so these types of things where you have legislatures and people who've been sold that CRT is the new boogeyman. Most people who talk about CRT don't know what they're talking about, right? But those who do know that we need a broader understanding of history. We need a broader understanding of togetherness. We need a broader understanding of healing, right? And to say that there's only one way to do it actually goes against academia. And I think those people who really believe in equity and justice and racial equity and racial justice have to be as resolute as those who want to take it away from them. Have to be as resolute and act in resolute ways and talk in resolute ways and write in resolute ways, knowing that you may lose something in the process of that, right?
But for the
Our
greater good.
Yeah, but it's for the greater good, right? It is because the thwarting and the limiting has never been a good way of enlightening people, right? It has never been a good way for people finding another pathway or another way to do something or a more innovative way of doing something, right?
Mhm.
And so part of the issue that I see is that those quote unquote good people voices are not as loud and not as resolute and is not as strong. You know, Dr. King talked about this around how his thing in terms of the KKK was that he was less concerned about the KKK as opposed to the silence of good white people,
There you go.
right? And I think we have to begin to develop a culture that can begin to hold that stuff, right? So we can see what's on the other side. What emerges if we actually begin to usher in a living embodied anti-racist culture? What could emerge? What energy could be used that's now used for protection and thwarting the system's attack and on us and on our bodies?
Thank you so much. I think based on what you've shared with us, you've really provoked us to not only read the book, but to also start to embrace and acknowledge what is truth
Mhm.
and how we feel in our health.
That's right.
Also, if we don't act, I heard this last part is if we're not willing to act, then are we setting in place a continual culture of racism with these laws, allowing these laws to pass, not being actively engaged
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
letting those powers that be know where we stand. I think that's going to
Absolutely.
thank you
Absolutely.
so much. This is, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. But what you've done is you've laid the foundation for some great conversations that are
Mm,
coming up at 9:45 or at
good.
spot. We'll start our next set of conversations where
Beautiful.
we have different presenters speaking on different aspects, dimensions of what you've talked about. And so I'm so very grateful to you being here and please don't make this the last time you visit us.
That's on y'all. Yeah.
We need you to come back to Texas because Texas is taking the glory right now of leading in some very disturbing
Yeah,
ways.
absolutely.
And I
Yeah.
recognize that this is my job. So, but in some very disturbing ways that I think we need more insight, we need more
Mm,
guidance, and we need more encouragement um, to change the status quo. So, thank you for provoking us in those ways.
you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. Ms. Jocks, what's our next directive? Would you please guide us? Do we go to the networking or the sponsors page?
Thank you, Dr. Lacey. Yes, so we encourage folks to click out of this Zoom and back into, thank you so much, Resmaa, back into the platform. Inside of the platform, you'll find the opportunity to connect to each other via the networking tab and to connect to our sponsors. Additionally, you have the opportunity to select which sessions you would like to attend. And so Once you go to the Education tab under Schedule, you can see the sessions that will start at 10 o'clock. By selecting Attend and then Join, you'll be added to the Zoom chat there. Remember, in order to secure your CEUs, you must attend 80% of the 45-minute sessions. We encourage everyone to complete a survey after the session that allows us to get some really rich and valuable feedback for future events like this. And if you are here for CEUs, it allows us to distribute those CEUs to you. Thank you so much to everyone, including all of our incredible speakers. This session is recorded and will be accessible after the symposium ends. We look forward to seeing you at other sessions throughout our morning. Take good care, everyone, and goodbye.